What's this old man doing here? This is invitation only, shouted the young security guard as he blocked the path of the 84-year-old veteran trying to enter Arlington National Cemetery for General Morrison's funeral. The elderly man wore a simple black suit that had seen better decades and moved slowly with the help of a wooden cane. To the guards, he looked like just another confused senior citizen who had wandered into the wrong place. But when they finally noticed the faded ribbon on his chest and discovered what it represented, the entire ceremony came to a halt as everyone realized they had just dishonored one of America's greatest heroes. The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery as military personnel prepared for the funeral of General William Morrison, a decorated officer who had served his country for over 4 decades. The ceremony was restricted to high-ranking officials, family members, and specially invited guests, the kind of exclusive gathering that required multiple levels of security clearance just to attend. Sergeant Michael Torres stood at the main checkpoint, examining invitations and identification with the thoroughness expected of someone guarding such an important event. At 26, he took his responsibilities seriously, understanding that any security breach during a general's funeral would end his military career before it really began. His partner, Corporal Jennifer Hayes, shared his dedication to protocol and attention to detail. That's when they noticed the elderly man approaching their checkpoint. He moved with the careful, measured steps of someone whose body had accumulated 8 decades of wear, leaning heavily on a polished wooden cane. His black suit was clean and pressed but clearly dated, the kind of formal wear that suggested dignity despite limited means. What immediately caught the guard's attention was his apparent lack of the crisp military bearing expected from funeral attendees. "Excuse me, sir," Sergeant Torres called out as the old man approached. "I need to see your invitation and identification." The veteran reached into his jacket pocket with trembling hands, producing a worn wallet and what appeared to be an old military ID card. Torres examined the documents with growing skepticism. The ID was decades old, and there was no formal invitation. "Sir, I don't see an invitation here," Torres said firmly. "This funeral is restricted to invited guests only." The old man looked up with eyes that held decades of experience and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of years. "Son, I served with General Morrison in Korea. I came to pay my respects." Corporal Hayes stepped forward, her tone professional but dismissive. "Sir, we have very strict protocols for this ceremony. Without proper authorization, I'm afraid you can't enter." The veteran's shoulders sagged slightly, but he maintained his dignity. "I understand you're doing your job, but Bill Morrison was my friend. We served together in the 2nd Infantry Division. I just want to say goodbye." Torres felt a moment of sympathy for the old man, but protocol was protocol. "Sir, if you were truly invited, you would have received official notification. We can't make exceptions, even for fellow veterans." What the guards didn't realize was that they were looking at Master Sergeant Robert "Bobby" Chen, a man whose service record was so classified that most of it wouldn't appear on standard military databases. His friendship with General Morrison went back to the frozen hills of Korea, where they had shared foxholes and saved each other's lives more times than either cared to remember. "Please, son," Chen said quietly, his voice carrying a dignity that should have commanded respect. "I've traveled 800 miles to be here. Bill Morrison was the best officer I ever served under." Torres exchanged glances with Hayes, both feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to bend the rules. "Sir, I'm sorry, but regulations are regulations. You'll need to leave the premises." The rejection was delivered with the cold efficiency of bureaucracy, but it carried the sting of dismissing a man's final wish to honor his friend. Chen nodded slowly, understanding that these young soldiers were following orders, even if those orders meant denying him the chance to pay his last respects to a man who had meant everything to him. As Chen turned to leave, his movement was observed by Colonel Patricia Williams, who was coordinating the ceremony's logistics. She had been watching the interaction from a distance and noticed something that the younger guards had missed: the way the old man carried himself despite his age, the unmistakable bearing that comes from decades of military service. "Sergeant Torres," Colonel Williams called out as she approached the checkpoint. "What's the situation here?" Torres straightened to attention. "Ma'am, we have an unauthorized civilian attempting to enter the ceremony. No invitation, no clearance." Williams looked at Chen, who had stopped but not left, still hoping for some resolution that would allow him to attend his friend's funeral. "Sir," Williams addressed Chen directly, "could you tell me about your service with General Morrison?" Chen's eyes lit up with the hope that someone might finally listen. "We served together in the 2nd Infantry Division, 23rd Infantry Regiment, Hill 266, November 1952. That's where General Morrison earned his Silver Star." The specific details caught Williams's attention. She had read Morrison's service record, and Hill 266 was indeed where he had distinguished himself in Korea. "What happened on Hill 266?" she asked, testing the old man's knowledge. Chen's voice grew stronger as he recounted memories that were still vivid after 7 decades. "Chinese forces had us surrounded for 3 days. We were down to our last ammunition when Bill led a counterattack that broke their lines. I was with him every step of the way. We held that hill together." The authenticity in Chen's voice was unmistakable. These weren't stories read from a book, but memories lived and survived. Williams realized she might be dealing with something more significant than a simple protocol violation. "Sergeant Torres, could you please escort Mr. Chen?" the veteran replied. "Master Sergeant Robert Chen, retired." Williams nodded. "Could you escort Master Sergeant Chen to a private area where we can verify his credentials properly? If you're enjoying this incredible story of how a veteran's service was finally recognized at his friend's funeral, make sure to subscribe for more amazing veteran stories like this one." What followed was a series of phone calls that sent shockwaves through the military's personnel databases. Williams contacted the Pentagon's Historical Records Division, the Korean War Veterans Association, and finally, General Morrison's own family. Each call revealed more pieces of a story that had been classified for decades. The breakthrough came when Williams reached General Morrison's son, Colonel David Morrison, who was already at the cemetery preparing for his father's funeral. "Colonel Morrison," Williams said over the phone, "I have a Master Sergeant Robert Chen here who claims to have served with your father in Korea. Do you know anything about this man?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Bobby Chen?" Colonel Morrison's voice carried surprise and emotion. "My father talked about Bobby Chen his entire life. He always said Bobby saved his life in Korea, but he never told us the details. Where is he? I need to see him immediately." The revelation transformed the entire situation. Colonel Morrison rushed to where Chen was waiting, and when the two men met, the family resemblance was unmistakable. "Mr. Chen," Colonel Morrison said with deep respect, "my father spoke of you often. He always regretted losing touch with you after the war." Chen's eyes filled with tears as he realized that his old friend had remembered him after all these years. Your father was the finest officer I ever served under, son. He saved my life more times than I can count. Colonel Morrison placed a gentle hand on Chen's shoulder. According to my father, it was the other way around. What happened next would be talked about in military circles for years to come. Colonel Morrison personally escorted Chen to the front row of the funeral ceremony, seating him with the family members and highest-ranking officials. But before the ceremony could begin, he made an announcement that stunned everyone present. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Morrison addressed the assembled dignitaries. I want you to meet Master Sergeant Robert Chen, a man my father considered one of the finest soldiers he ever served with. The crowd turned to look at the elderly man who had been nearly turned away at the gate just an hour earlier. Colonel Morrison continued, in November 1952 on Hill 266 in Korea, this man saved my father's life and the lives of dozens of other American soldiers. His courage under fire was legendary, and his friendship with my father lasted a lifetime, even though they lost touch after the war. But the most dramatic moment was yet to come. As Colonel Morrison spoke, Chen slowly opened his old suit jacket and revealed something that made several people in the audience gasp. Pinned to his chest, faded with age but unmistakable in its significance, was the ribbon of the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration for valor. This man, Colonel Morrison announced, his voice heavy with emotion, is not just a veteran. He is a Medal of Honor recipient who has carried his honor quietly and humbly for over 70 years. The entire gathering rose to their feet in spontaneous tribute to a hero they had almost overlooked. Sergeant Torres and Corporal Hayes, who had been watching from their security positions, felt the full weight of their near mistake. They had come within minutes of turning away one of America's most decorated heroes from his best friend's funeral. The lesson would stay with them for the rest of their careers. The funeral proceeded with Chen seated in the place of honor he deserved. During the ceremony, it was revealed that General Morrison had left specific instructions in his will requesting that if Bobby Chen could ever be located, he should be personally thanked for his service and friendship. The general had spent years trying to reconnect with his old friend, but had been unable to locate him. After the ceremony, Chen was surrounded by military officials and family members who wanted to hear his stories and thank him for his service. The Medal of Honor he wore had been earned for single-handedly holding off a Chinese assault that allowed wounded soldiers to be evacuated. But like many heroes of his generation, he had never sought publicity for his actions. Colonel Williams approached Chen as the ceremony concluded. Master Sergeant, I owe you an apology for the treatment you received at the gate. That should never have happened. Chen smiled with the grace of someone who had faced much worse situations than an overzealous security checkpoint. Colonel, those young soldiers were doing their job. No apology necessary. But Williams wasn't finished. Sir, would you be willing to speak with our security personnel about recognizing veterans who may not have proper documentation? Your experience today highlighted some serious gaps in our protocols. Chen agreed, understanding that his humiliating experience could be turned into a teaching moment for future generations of soldiers. In the days that followed, Chen's story spread throughout the military community. The man who had been nearly turned away from his friend's funeral became a symbol of the quiet heroes who live among us, their extraordinary service hidden behind ordinary appearances. The security protocols at Arlington were revised to include better procedures for recognizing and accommodating veterans who might not have formal invitations, but had earned the right to pay their respects. Sergeant Torres and Corporal Hayes requested to attend Chen's speaking session with security personnel. They wanted to apologize personally and learn from their mistake. Master Sergeant, Torres said after hearing Chen's full story. I'm sorry we didn't recognize your service immediately. How do we make sure this never happens again? Chen looked at the young soldiers with understanding rather than anger. Son, you couldn't have known my story just by looking at me. But remember that every elderly veteran carries history you can't see. Sometimes the most decorated heroes are the ones who look the most ordinary. The lesson was simple but profound. Heroism doesn't always announce itself with obvious symbols. Today, there's a new training module at Arlington National Cemetery that includes Chen's story as an example of why security personnel must balance vigilance with respect for veterans who may not have formal documentation but have earned the right to be present. The training emphasizes that true security comes not just from following procedures, but from understanding the human stories behind those procedures. Master Sergeant Robert Chen returned home after the funeral, but his quiet life was forever changed. The military community that had nearly overlooked him now sought him out as a speaker and historian. He began sharing his stories not for recognition, but to ensure that the sacrifices of his generation would not be forgotten by those who came after. The Medal of Honor he had worn hidden under civilian clothes for 70 years became a bridge between past and present, reminding everyone that America's greatest heroes often walk among us unrecognized, carrying their service with quiet dignity until circumstances reveal the extraordinary courage that lies beneath an ordinary appearance.